welcome back to Frankly Speaking in conjunction with the Knights of Christendom. I'm your host, Frank. I'm joined here with my good friend, Anthony Chiosa. Anthony, an issue I've been taking on lately a lot, a little kind of thing I've had with my friends of the political right, how I keep explaining to them, or at least talking to them about their frustration with the mainstream media and how the mainstream media always seems to side with the political left. And, for the right, it's kind of a double-edged sword because the idea of constitutional free press as outlined in the First Amendment was designed by at least the philosophical principles of the founding to be a check against government. And yet here we are in the year 2021, and it seems like the press has colluded with the government. The idea was by the framers that government can always become out of control, tyrannical, abusive, assert power for itself, and the free press would be one of the mechanisms that would control a potential tyrannical government. And yet, how is it that we now, at this point in history, find ourselves looking at a press, Anthony, that, has colluded with government? Let's be honest here. I mean, for the political right, it's really a difficult one because what do you do with this, right? We have these cherished, beloved principles of the founders. Many conservatives consider them the smartest men of their time, and I think there's also a divine kind of providential kind of perspective that they carry about the framers of the country as well too. And yet here are one of the principles of the framers that really has been turned on its head with all this kind of moral disorder that has swept through our culture at this point in history. The press has kind of fallen in line with all these other institutions that seem to be struggling, whether it's education, whether it's the government, whether it's corporation, whatever you may have it. My point here is that for those constitutional thumpers who believe that a free press, or at least the altruistic version or understanding or principles of a free press, were always going to keep a tyrannical government from ever taking hold in America, yet the complete opposite has partaken here in America. Has it not?
Yeah, Frank, I think that's a fair statement. When you look at the situation, we have this kind of hybrid system between communism and I wouldn't even really call it fascism. If you call it fascism just because the state and governmental apparatus happens to be colluding with big business and you have a rotating door between those two sectors, that really doesn't spell out pure fascism. It's an element there, an element, kind of a pseudo element of it. And then you have these corporations here in the United States and elsewhere in the West, but especially here in the States, embracing communist ideology. And so this hybrid, whatever it is, has also been colluding and working with the press, which is also the private sector. There's some weird overlap with the press too, but there's a lot going on here that people in the United States, they tend to keep all of these pieces in separate boxes, like the press and business and government. And each one of these things is in their own box when really there's a significant amount of overlap. So the very idea that you could have a for-profit business based on freedom of the press to kind of somehow be a check and balance against companies and government collusion, it's just, the notion is absurd. Divorcing the church and morality from this is absurd. Take the case of Nick Salmon, for instance, who they just slandered in the press, slandered this young man just because he had a certain hat on, like a MAGA hat, and they just made up the story. And that's what you can do with video footage. You can clip things out and you can make up the story and you can create the reality. And that's in many instances what these people do. Now, in a Catholic civilization, there's no way you could get away with doing what you did to Nick Salmon. And many times the press here in the United States does get away with these things. In that case, they didn't, right? Well, you have people come forward offering this pro bono. Again, it goes back to the money. If you have enough money, you can get good representation.
That's very interesting, Anthony. You bring up the profit motive. I hadn't gone that direction with it. in regards to what has gone wrong essentially with free press. For me, like we've always talked about here, and I think you alluded to this as well, is sort of the moral disorder, the moral dysfunction that has come about really in the wake of classical liberal civilization, right? Dethroning the church in many respects from its authority to maintain moral order in civilization in favor now, of course, in post-enlightenment society of this, sort of greater general license that we all partake in now under the guise of freedom and liberty. And it's interesting because, see, that's where I believe the problem is with the free press. Because when you have a completely disordered civilization, those individuals will naturally take those disorders with them in whatever institution really they partake in society, right? We all have to work, we all have to eat, we all have to do what we do every day. And when you look around our civilization, really, the press is no different than every other institution that has been consumed by really the greater culture at large, right? Whether it's education, Anthony, or whether it's the media, whether it's Hollywood, you got the press, you got government, you got sporting, whatever it may be. This greater moral disorder has descended into every branch of really our civilization for that matter. And I think it goes back to, I think, a fallacy at the founding principle, right? And that is by removing the authority of the church. And as we've discussed so many times before on this channel, the founding fathers weren't exactly orthodox. They left religion sort of as an open book. And as an open book, America has been, well, in many respects, a Protestant basket case with all these contradicting beliefs and contradicting moral values. And you wonder why we're suffering through these, this great moral collapse at this point in history. And how can it be that the media was going to be exempt from this moral calamity in many respects? Listen, if the purpose of the free press is to keep checks and balances on the government, fine. I understand that. I get that. But the press is no different than any other institution that really falls in line really with sort of the biases of the fallen nature of humanity. We've seen this throughout all of society. We see it in the individual within the realm of society as well too. And the press has really, fallen in line. Again, the original sin of the founding, in my opinion, was really the de-Christianization of society and not establishing the social kingship of Christ and putting the church, the sacraments, the faith, and the word of God at the center of civilization. And the free press is just as corrupt as every other institution. And here are our friends on the right just absolutely shocked that it didn't work out, Anthony.
Precisely, Frank. And the reason I bring up profit motive is because look back at Calvinism, look back at the Puritan mindset. God shows his favor on you when you are gaining wealth. Okay? Now, look back at the profit motives of the classical liberals themselves and the different philosophies that developed, these economic philosophies that developed. It doesn't matter which school you're looking at particularly. There are some differences, some of them quite large, whether you're looking at, people like the Austrian school, or you're looking more like what we have today, unfortunately. Either way, you look at any of these schools that came out of this classical liberal mindset, they divorced the idea of morality in some respects from the economic theory. And so now you have this behemoth moving forward throughout time where making money is good. And as a matter of fact, coupled with, from the religious standpoint, but then Protestant religion standpoint, and then coupled with this philosophical economic outlook that in many cases, depending on what school you are actually looking at, will say greed is good. Okay, so we've gone from God telling us that we're going to have to carry our cross, that wealth actually makes it more difficult for a man to get into heaven, to this perverse notion here in the United States that greed is good and that actually that's God smiling upon you. Now, what is that going to do to the press that's a profit-motivated organization in the United States? That's not going to become a check and balance. That's going to be turned on the people, precisely as it has been. Even Fox just plays second fiddle. They'll tell you a little bit of what you want to hear, but, look at who owns them, okay? And you have to go really deep into information away from mainstream sources, even away from some social media sources now that I would consider mainstream sources. It's not really an underground media anymore like it used to be. And to really come across the information about what's possibly really happening and why that's really happening. And that leads into a whole other area of just insanity, to be honest, when you start treading down that path. Because then, as you start to acquire that information, you begin to look to your other fellow Americans, even in the traditionalist Catholic camp, you begin to look a little bit weird.
Yeah, see, that's interesting, Anthony. You bring up another interesting point there. You alluded to it at least, how the underground media now is being soaked up by the mainstream media, right? As sort of the cable wars are dying off and people are streaming everything and turning to the internet, the media has been forced to adapt and come into the underground media, or at least what was the underground media. And a lot of that sort of news that we get now is infected as well, too. I find it interesting in the sense that for a long time, those on the political right who believed in the purity of the free system, again, as articulated by the founding fathers, oftentimes were hesitant to go deep into the dark underground media. And while certainly there's concerns there, right? There are some kooks and whack jobs there. Oftentimes, a lot of the news that we were getting from the underground media that the mainstream media was never reporting really came to fruition in many ways, right? It's like we're talking about the mandates from the government today, how, this year's reality is last year's conspiracy theory, right? Well, that's happened really throughout, well, really the past 20, 30, 40 years here as the sort of the history of the internet plays out before our very eyes today. And I find that interesting. If we're friends of the right, oftentimes who put their faith in talk radio and your traditional medias, now they're finding themselves on the out. Just like their whole thing with corporations, right? We've talked about this idea of fascism. You brought it up earlier here, and how the corporations have become fascistic in their alliance with government in that respect. Well, it's no different than what the media has done with government, right? I don't know if you could call it fascism. I'm not a fan of fascism in any kind of way, but really the consolidation of power, the moral corruption within corporations has happened just like we warned about, because you put no moral principles in the marketplace, the market arena of ideas and the economy, so corporations could just gobble up all the land and all the resources in order to, again, consolidate power. And surprise, surprise, now they've colluded with government. We've seen the same thing in corporations that we've seen with the free press here. And yet our friends, again, with this altruistic notion of freedom without any moral dictates, it seems like it continues to bite them in the rear end in every direction that they turn, Anthony. I mean, are they ever going to figure this out, or do we just double down on stupid?
Well, the problem is everybody keeps doubling down on stupid, Frank. You hit on a lot of high points there that I'd like to address. Number one, the underground media itself has been undermined, as you point out. And number two, those that are still trying to participate in it to the degree that they are capable, without being censored or threatened, it's difficult. It makes it very difficult to get real information out there. But we have seen, we even here at the Knights of Christendom, we've played a small role in this. When we started talking about this stuff over a year ago, I started talking about all of the stuff that could happen with this disease. I think it was February 7th is when I started. And I was right away about all of those things based on research I conducted, not from any news media sources, but through the scientific research itself. Okay? And now here we are with gain of function and Fauci and all this stuff that has happened. Now, I never could have imagined that Fauci would have been connected to it. And I held back on criticizing him personally for a long time because I wasn't sure. I didn't. And as Catholics, if you don't have hard evidence on something, you're detracting against somebody. And in a lot of ways, and sometimes it can be slander or calumny. And in a lot of ways, the prostitutes that we see now, many Catholics out there that are on social media are becoming kind of prostitutes themselves. And as soon as I hear violations against the 8th commandment not once, but twice. If I hear, you can mess up. You can mess up. I've messed up myself. It's possible. But to consistently go on air and cause division and just the things you hear people say, it's incredible. I shut those people down. I shut them down, and I've done it recently. That's kind of a tangent, but it just shows you how the classical liberal mindset has infected even traditional Catholics, and we've got to get away from this. We've got to be Catholic. Now, I was a part of the underground media in a small way. Before I started Knights of Christendom, probably about 2 years prior, I was a part of Vox Populi News with Farrah Prudence, and we had to shut Vox Populi down. Farrah was getting death threats on a fairly regular basis for speaking out against Islam, and somebody leaked the information about who she was and where she was located. That was troubling. So that operation got shut down. I picked up not long after that. I covered the Vegas shooting, and the video went viral, Frank. The video went viral, and immediately the threats began to come in. My computer was under constant attack, and I was essentially threatened personally. And I had to take that video down. Okay, and the guy I spoke with that I used to work at Vox Populi with, he was just an editor. He also did some underground journalism and side journalism himself. He said he had been contacted by the highest three-letter agency out there, that they basically told him to shut up on a certain story, and that, he was scared. All right, well, this is what we get when we have this kind of weird secular state set up where pluralism reigns, and you don't have any moral checks and balances on anything anymore. And sometimes it's hard for the person in the media to decide, is this the right thing to report on or not? Even when we look at Edward Snowden, for instance, trying to make that decision. Do I need to bring this to the public's attention? And then if you do, in this civilization, good luck, because people are going to be out to get you.
And see, that's the fascinating thing about it, Anthony. Not only have the classical liberals lost control of the mainstream media, they are now, as we've seen, post-2020 election, they're losing control of the underground media as well, too, as everything is being consumed by this sort of moral degeneracy and this collusion that was brought about, in my opinion, by moral degeneracy. They can't control their beloved corporations. In fact, the right now will tell you they don't like corporations anymore. Now, that wasn't the case up until a few years ago. Remember when they were all upset at John McCain for bringing up, the McCain-Feingold bill, which was trying to limit money in politics, and it was the political right that went after John McCain for saying that money equates free speech, that corporations could impugn or infuse as much money as they wanted to into elections in the name of free speech. Do we forget that? Now, listen, I'm not a fan of John McCain, but it goes to show you where the mindset of conservatives was just a few years ago. They had no problems. I remember listening to Sean Hannity not that long ago, maybe a year or two ago before this last election, debating liberals on the benefits and the good nature of corporations as they participate in the most efficient means of the economic engine of prosperity. They give us goods and services nobody else can provide at a much more efficient rate, and they create jobs. Because in America, what is really the greatest virtue? It's not the Ten Commandments. It's not the Bible. Those are all secondary issues in again, this abstract Protestant kind of mashup with Freemasonry that we have. The most important is what? Materialism. You alluded to it earlier. The Calvinist founding, the puritanical principles of the health and wealth gospels. We sort of have that ghostly past, right? Those puritanical principles of making money and finding God's divine justice of sorts within that puritanical founding is what leads all Americans today. At the end of the day, big business is good. Why? They provide jobs for people. Never mind the people were thrown off the land by these same corporations, which what I would consider true freedom and true liberty is when people are working and have their own homes and their own land so they could be self-sufficient. Never mind that we're all now subjugated to this usury system, especially now in the midst of COVID, as you bring up, right? Because we can't ever really truly isolate ourselves. Let's assume, for the sake of argument, Anthony, this isolation period that we need and managing the masks and managing the vaccines and all this stuff. If people actually own their own land, if that wasn't gobbled up by corporations and financiers that the political right always supported, people could isolate themselves in a more just and prudent manner. We all wouldn't be forced out to, into the corporate system, where we're all intermingling with one another. People would have true freedom to opt out of the system, and then what government mandates would matter even less. Now, listen, I'm not against an employee-employer sort of economic system if people choose that, but my point is people should have the freedom, true freedom, to choose what they wanted. The land never belonged to the corporations. The land never belonged to the financiers. The land never belonged to the bankers. The land was given to us by God, and it belongs to the people in order that we can take care of our families. But the political right has fallen for these laissez-faire, libertarian-esque economic principles that has led to very shrewd businessmen consolidating power, consolidating capital, and yes, consolidating the land. Have you guys seen what the latest housing numbers are? Huh? Have you guys seen what the latest land numbers are and what it costs for a family now? And then now, as we're all intermixed in the midst of this pandemic, all of a sudden, the government is putting out mandates on everybody. Well, of course they are. Of course they are, because we're all forced to intermix with one another, because true freedom in a usury system doesn't exist. And again, this is all wrong. Now, I'm going off on a tangent now myself. But, getting back to the idea of the free press, it's all been disordered, just like all the other principles of the classical liberals have been disordered. Don't get me wrong. There's many principles that I believe classical liberals hold to be true. But foundationally, those come from the old Catholic world. And that's another argument, how we present those principles today and how they're supposed to work in proper order, unlike the complete chaos the West has become over the past 250 years.
All right, you talk about mandates. What isn't mandated anymore? We've seen the loss of not only true freedom, but we're going to see the loss of some license, too, for other license in our civilization, because really the extreme, far radical left is creating a new pseudo-morality, which is inverted, and it's actually based on evil. And as I say time and time again, we see this enshrined in our own Supreme Court, in our own system of law, which natural law becomes inverted. So it's small wonder that the press has been completely bought out at this point in history, that its original function to protect the people has actually been inverted as well, and it is weaponized now against the people as propaganda, whether the right or the left, to get them to think a certain way. And unfortunately, even traditional Catholics, even those that consider themselves the traddest of trad, have been influenced by this notion, and they can't even see it. And it costs them the ability to even be obedient to Holy Mother Church and to the prelates, and separating out the difference between the office and the men that occupy the office, and how we need to listen through the gift of the Holy Spirit to their words, as they are the magisterium, as the Council of Trent has pointed out, in the Catechism of Trent has pointed out, that you follow them in everything save sin. You are to be obedient. It's that simple. That's what tradition is. And the classical liberal infection has run its course through American Catholics. And it's not a surprise to me that it even happens to the best of us that love the traditional Mass. And I just have to say, I've, I've been called a coward recently in some more comment sections by people, oddly enough, that are nameless and faceless. Okay? My name and my face are out there. I say everything I say 100% all of the time, knowing that I'm potentially facing danger. And in fact, I have. I know very few people have walked around with their sidearm all day because they've been concerned about some things they said in the media where you know you've got spooks or somebody else messaging you and threatening you because of what you've revealed.
And see, Anthony, that's what's really amazing about this whole thing is that we're all scared at this point in time. We have to edit ourselves, wash ourselves. You know, and we have that, that idea of doxing that many people are scared of, where they try and hide their sort of identity online, and which has a double effect, really. In some respects, I understand why some people would hide their identity online, especially when they're using alternative media. On the other hand, for myself, I've been public for a long time, and maybe because I got started in a day and age where you could speak a little bit more freely, like I said a couple of decades ago, and now it's devolved into sort of this tyrannical kind of being that we're going through right now. It's a very difficult time, and we're all trying to make these decisions. And really, for those that do keep anonymity, that criticize those that are open in public, well, listen, show your face. Show your face. And then make your comments and tell us how to think or how to react or what just prudence is in your mind. And so, yeah, we've been tempted by those groups as well, too, at the Knights of Christendom, because we won't go to certain extremes. We're all about the faith here. That's what we've always been. Our job, our mission is to convert back to Holy Mother Church, because we see the faith of it all everywhere and everything. Just like with this idea of the free press. It's distorted precisely because moral justice has broken down. Moral order has broken down. Thus, you really don't have a free press anymore, because there was never no moral principles by which the free press ever had to guide by, or at least follow in that respect. So there you have it there, Anthony. Listen, one point of clarification at the end there, when I said the land is for the people. No, sorry. I know that sounded like a lot of communist rhetoric, right? But it wasn't. What I meant was that land, private property, which I'm a big believer in, big time believer in private property, should have greater access for everyday Americans in that respect. My point is you look at this capitalist system, this market system, everyday Joes, everyday family people have been thrown off the land, where nobody has freedom anymore. And now we're dependent on this employee-employer relationship to make sure that somehow we survive, Anthony, in this idea. So listen, we've come a long way. We've gone, full circle in this podcast. We've said a lot here. The free press. I guess my last question for you is, what do we do with it at this point, right? Because some would say it sucks, it's worthless, it's a pile of crap, but yet they gave it to us. And in some respects, I believe there is a place for the press, right? But it's all disordered in the end. What do we do with this thing? And in essence, because it is part of our American Constitution, where do we go from here, Anthony?
That's a great question and some great points you made there. I think, first of all, obviously there are reasons for people to keep a certain amount of anonymity online and perhaps completely get behind a VPN, take extra steps beyond a VPN, especially if you're going around searching for this information. You have to have a certain level of prudence with your family. And like you, Frank, I've been at this for many, many years now. And look, everything I've said and done, it's out there, it's cataloged, it's documented. I've been at it for well over a decade, really 20 years essentially is what it comes down to, almost 20 years, probably more like 18. But it's out there for everybody to see, and it is what it is. And really, I think this tacks on to your final question, where do we go from here as far as media goes, and as being Catholics? I think we use the media the way it's intended to be used, and we listen to the media the way it's intended to be listened to. So, for example, I need to make sure as a Catholic media, social media personality, a rather small one, but here I am, I need to make sure that I understand that I am a representative of the Catholic faith to the audience. And I have to be as charitable as possible at all times. And as a matter of fact, I did apologize, this anonymous person who never, oddly enough, apologized to me. I think also we have to make sure that we're not violating anything with the eighth commandment. We have to be so careful about that as Catholics, and really knowing our place within the Catholic laity. And we do have a little more leeway to criticize, obviously, what's going on in the church than some prelates would. And that responsibility has to be taken seriously. And a lot of forethought needs to go into whatever we just throw out there into social media world. Maybe sit on it for a couple weeks if it's something that has you particularly steamed. That said, I think, on the other end of it, as a listener, like me personally, there's a lot of good Catholic traditionalists and Catholics out there that I listen to that remain charitable, and they always have something to say to the faith that lines up more with reason and less with emotion. And we can't let emotion speak to us primarily. And so I think just use social media, use media as a Catholic would, and take a vacation from it. Take a vacation from it every other day, or maybe just check it out every few days. Don't let it rule your existence and your life. I think that that is really kind of one of the most dangerous things. And this is a topic for another time, but how social media really tacks onto that, Frank, and we see a loss of charity across the board and really becoming more polarized within Catholicism itself. And we're supposed to have unity in the body of Christ, my friend. I think that's important for all Catholics to do, really, through the light of the teachings that we have through our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ.
Very well said, my friend. And while you address the traditionalists in the Catholic camp, I'll address my friends on the right, the classical liberals. Listen, guys, we're here for a reason. If you feel like the country has gone off the deep end and the entire purpose of a nation of freedom, liberty, everything that we come to believe has come to a head here to where it doesn't seem like we have freedom, liberty anymore, well, you've been warned. You've been warned by integralists for a long time. Let's put it that way. The revolutionary spirit of many of you guys on the right are the very principles that have been used to undermine our civilization and our country. I think it's time that we look in the mirror and reanalyze what has happened. To simply say everything has gone wrong, it's the fault of the Marxists, it's the fault of the communists, it's the fault of the left-wingers, it's the fault even of the fascists, right? To make up these boogeymen now at this point. Listen, it has been a far-left infiltration into all the institutions of the world. And as we said so many times before, whether it's the corporations or the government or even the media in this case, it's an infiltration of moral depravity. It's all been premised by a moral collapse. It's no coincidence that the collapse of the culture and really how corrupt the political system has become over the past 60, 70, 80 years has coincided with the great apostasy, the great loss of faith, which leads to the moral depravity we're living through right now. And if we don't get true religion straight, we're never going to get any of these institutions straight, ever. None of them, including the media, including the free press. So in some respects, the First Amendment has become irrelevant. And we can have, these visions of past and let's go back to the founding principles and all that stuff. But let's be honest here. It's not going to happen. Even if we magically went back to the past, back into history, and went back to the founding principles, there's no reason to think that in 250 years we wouldn't be back there, right? There's something that was wrong at the origins that gave power for Satan to move into all of our lives, including all the institutions of the world. The media, the press is no exception to that. If you're expecting tomorrow, oh, please, just report the truth. Just tell the truth, free media, just tell the truth. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. The free press has been hijacked by the elements of dark forces like every other institution has. Wake up, my friends on the right. We need more order first and foremost. We need to proclaim the social kingship of Christ. And through that, the institutions in some capacity, again, we have a fallen human nature, so nothing will ever be perfect. But if we can reestablish the social kingship of Christ, find the faith, establish the sacramental life again, and believe in the faith of our ancestors, that the rebellion of the classical liberals rejected, then I think we could find once again some semblance of a civilization that's past that, well, made a lot more sense. We need to find the faith of our ancestors again, and not this willy-nilly licensed society where I get to make it up as I go. Because guess what? That's what the free press is doing now. They're making it up as they go in order to fulfill whatever ambition in the name of liberty they're looking to fulfill. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. This is Frank. I want to thank my friend Anthony Chiosa for joining me tonight. Signing off for the Knights of Christendom, and frankly speaking, good night, everybody.